Welcome to Ball State Today. On today's program, we examine the bewildering world of children's toys and what to select for children for Christmas. We'll have a song and dance by the Ball State University singers, and then we're going to examine the phenomena of the Christmas star, what the wise men saw some 2,000 years ago. Department stores at this time of year are crammed with thousands of rattling, walking, and talking toys. Dr. Betty Beeson, a Ball State University elementary education professor and author of studies on how children play, is with us to talk about toys and how we should select them. You know, Dr. Beeson, every year we have this toy testing, and we talk about the kind of toys that children should have and so forth. The safety of toys. Are we making any progress in this respect?
Yes, I think we are. I think many more parents are aware of toy safety when they choose toys. I think there are more restrictions on imported toys. We're more careful looking for things like what the teddy bear is stuffed with, or the amount of lead content in paint, that kind of thing. But probably some of the most dangerous things in toys I guess choose to ignore because they're the toys we want. Such things as the skateboards and
do they cause a lot of
toys
accidents
with motors.
and injuries?
Yes, they do. Actually, if you wanted your child to have a skateboard, probably wearing a helmet when they use a skateboard would be just as wise as wearing a helmet on a motorcycle or a motorized vehicle.
We see at the university, we see the young people with skateboards doing flip-flops, and should they fall on their neck or back, they could be seriously injured.
Many injuries.
Now, how about the toys with motors? What's wrong with those?
Well, so many children are barely ready to use tricycles and scooters under their own motor. They can get the tricycle going too fast, or they can get their scooter going too fast. Then you add to that a motor that they have no control over, and the child can very easily lose control of what they're doing, and then because it is faster, more frequent accidents.
You're not talking about these small trucks with motors. You're talking about a vehicle the child can get into and motivate.
And it's amazing how many parents of very young children are buying these motorized vehicles, yes.
Yeah. Everyone wants the best for their child, but they should be careful.
It's sort of like the adult wanting the train set for the adult. And I think sometimes it's the parents that want some of these things more than the children.
Children can really be entertained by some very simple devices, can't they? Things that are made in the home, or very simple things like blocks and building sets.
I think the best toys for children are toys that they can handle, manipulate, work with, do things with. They're the most educational toys, too, because they learn all kinds of pre-math skills, like seriation by putting the small block, then the next size block, classifying all the red blocks together, all the green parts or pieces of a puzzle, whatever. Things that they can take apart, put together. They're free to err, to be silly, to goof off, to try again with no threat. And that's the way they learn.
And you can't destroy or damage them easily. But you know, when you're selecting a toy, whether you're a grandparent or a parent, you look at these educational toys and you say, yuck. You know, when you were a child, you didn't want them. You wanted something flashy. You wanted the robot on the TV screen, or the newest bicycle, or whatever. Isn't that true?
Well, I'd like to say yes, but I think I was more the Shirley Temple era than the robot. But yes, I liked the kinds of toys that little girls were supposed to like. The pretty dolls. I can remember the Sonia Henny dolls with the fur trim, and the ice skates were the first kind of grown-up doll, but nothing like the Barbie dolls today.
Well, you can spend an absolute fortune on just outfitting the doll.
The clothes, the accessories, the cars, the houses, the boats.
Do you think that the value of a toy impresses a child?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I've seen many a child play longer with the carton that it came in than the object itself.
Okay, now let's talk about the psychological advantages and disadvantages in toys, and there are some, are there not?
Definitely.
Okay.
If you have a toy that is one particular thing, and it does one thing, and it looks like that, once you've done it or mastered it, learned how to do it, it frequently loses its interest, no matter how expensive it is. Then when someone keeps saying to the child, well, play with such and such, or we put a lot of money in this, or Aunt Mary gave it to you, it can cause all kinds of problems when the child doesn't want to play with it. By the same token, if a child's playing with the pots and pans and the boxes and the containers and the scraps that it came with, sometimes parents can be very upset over that. From a psychological standpoint, we learn by playing. We feel good about playing when no one's telling us we shouldn't do something. No one's taking something away from us. And so the very natural kinds of toys are the best toys to build the best self-concept. You see, there's a great deal of pressure on children to play with sex-appropriate toys. And
For example?
well, the little boys frequently are not encouraged and are strongly discouraged from having any kind of a doll. Maybe a G.I. Joe, maybe. But the parents would really prefer guns, wagons, cars, trucks, that kind of thing. And so if some well-meaning aunt like me would give a nephew a nice, soft, cuddly toy, there could be a great deal of confusion, and it could have poor psychological effects on the child because the father might not allow the child to play with it.
So how do you avoid these incidents?
Well, I think you need to know your parents as well as the children when you buy toys, because if it's going to cause a problem, then you're better off not to do it. I would suggest staying away from any kind of sex stereotype toys and getting the kinds of things that would not be controversial. All kinds of blocks, all kinds of the Legos and the Duco toys and the pull-aparts, the present-day bright colored toys that were sort of like our log cabin, Lincoln log blocks.
They were very popular.
Tinker toys and that kind of thing. You see, the reason these kinds of things go on and on through the years is because they can be what I want them to be. I can impose my ideas on the toys. It can be a farm, it can have a fence, it can be a barn, or it can be an airplane. I can take two pieces put together and fly it. I can do whatever I want to do, and it enhances my imagination and tends to make me a more creative child. And because I can do whatever I want to do, I'm happy, and nobody's telling me I can't or I should. And if I make a mistake, I can put something else together and try over and over.
Okay. Now, we've been talking about children, 3, 4, 5 years of age. They stop playing with blocks at, 6, 7, 8? No.
Probably, but depending on how complicated the put-together things are.
All right. How about, say, the older child? Let's get up into the 8 or 9 or 10-year-old child. We don't give them Lincoln log cabins and Tinker toys and things like that.
No. I think there again, if you're looking at children, you have to take into consideration what they want. And I think here you have some peer pressure, what their friends want. For example, there's research that shows that girls that play with girls more interaction, are much more prone to want female-oriented toys. Boys that have more interaction with other boys, or other boys their own age, are more apt to recognize this is a male toy and this is what I want. So the peer pressure has a lot to do with it. TV has a lot to do with it, and the media and the catalogs. They see the toys that are masculine and strong and assertive, and the boys are playing with these toys. So that has a lot to do with what they want.
And children, of course, always compare. On Christmas Day or the day after, I got this and I got that.
I got that.
How do you feel about parents caving into the TV and the commercial pressure?
I think parents need to know what their children want, and I think it's fine to have a favorite toy or something you want if it's in the ballpark of what the parents would allow. For example, if a child wanted a gun and I was very opposed to guns, which I am, then no matter how much that child wanted a particular kind of a Stingray gun, I wouldn't buy it. On the other hand, if the father is a hunter and cleans the guns in the kitchen and guns are a part of that family's life, then if that child wants a gun, it would be a very natural kind of thing. So I think the children sometimes want something that is acceptable, but occasionally want something that is unacceptable. Also, it could be unacceptable in the price range or the location, something that might be a fine toy for a child out in the country where their space would not be a good toy for in an apartment. And I think if you cave in, so to speak, to what the children want, you're just asking for trouble in those areas. So I think there's nothing wrong with saying, no, you know, you cannot have this toy.
But not arbitrarily. You should explain to the child, should you not?
There ought to be a reason.
Mm-hmm.
There ought to be a reason. Always should be a reason.
Whether you're dealing with toys or anything else,
Or
is that
anything
right?
else.
Yeah.
That's right. If we could just take the time to explain to children why we say what we do and why it's important, and always with love and understanding. You know, you love the child, you understand that they want this toy, you would like to be able to let them have this toy. However, even though you love them and understand them, this is not something that we can have at this time because.
In closing, you've seen the toys on the shelf, you've seen them advertised on television, and you would take closer notice because you work with children and you study them. Are you happy with this year's offering of toys?
I'm happy with many of the toys, yes. I think there are a preponderance of guns and look-alike, very realistic guns, and this gun that shoots the invisible ink and all of these new things. I'm not sure
I haven't seen that.
I go along with some of these kinds of things. I think the toys, the dolls and all are beautiful and lovely. I think there are far more educational toys now than ever before.
So it's getting better.
Animated toys.
Good. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Dr. Betty Beeson has been our guest talking about toys. Dr. Beeson is a professor of elementary education at Ball State University. And now we're going to see a performance by the Ball State University singers, both dance and song. What was a star the wise men followed almost 2,000 years ago? Dr. Roger Scott, director of the Ball State University Planetarium, presents each Christmas season several shows explaining that story, and we're going to see part of that now. Not the whole story, Dr. Scott, are we? But a good
No, we're just going to just give an outline of some of the things that we talk about during the program.
Good. Even as a matter of fact, about 2 hours after our program ends on Sunday at 5:30, you're giving a presentation in the planetarium.
That's right. At 7:30 will be a presentation of this. You know, we're giving the programs the next 2 weekends, 7:30 on Friday evenings, 2:30 and 7:30 on Sundays.
And really something that families should take their children to.
Oh yes, I think so.
Good. Well, let's take a look. You have some slides now that give us some explanation.
Yes, this first picture here is showing you how we use the planetarium as a time machine. Because for serious investigations, we have to actually move the wobble of the Earth's axis backwards 2,000 years in time. You see, as the Earth spins, it undergoes a very slow wobble, taking 26,000 years to complete one revolution. Right now, our North Pole is pointed toward Polaris, the North Star. 2,000 years ago, we had no North Star. And our planetarium can accurately show you the sky several thousand years into the future or into the past.
What do you mean we didn't have a North Star?
There was no bright, naked-eye star in the vicinity of the North Celestial Pole 2,000 years ago in the time of Christ. So there was just nothing there. The sky still appeared to revolve about that point, just as it does today, but there was no star there. Now, there have been many, many speculations about the Star of Bethlehem, and we have to keep in mind that the word star had a very broad meaning to people in ancient times. Anything could be called a star. You know, for example, a comet referred to a long-haired star. A planet referred to a star that appeared to move or wander relative to the background stars. So that's one of the things I tell the audience, that we must keep in mind that the word star had a very broad meaning. Now, one of the possibilities that has been suggested is a comet. This happens to be a picture of Halley's Comet, one of the most famous comets of all, that I took on March the 22nd last year from Parker City Elementary School.
You took this?
Yes, and
that's an excellent photograph.
Halley's Comet, we think, was visible from Palestine in 12 BC. But we think that's a little bit too early to be associated with the birth of Christ. Most scholars, I think, would tell you that probably Christ was born sometime between 8 and 2 BC. But again, we must remember that the exact date that Christ was born is a very controversial subject. And so I think the best we can do is to pin it down within those few years like that. Another possibility for consideration is a fireball or a bright meteor, but I don't think anyone really takes this too seriously, for the even though it's very eye-catching, because fireballs don't last but very long.
And the wise men followed the star for how long?
The wise men, we think, were from the land of ancient Persia, okay, well to the east of Israel, and we're pretty sure it would have taken them several weeks, perhaps a month or more, to journey into Israel, asking along the way for any news of Christ's birth, until they finally made it to Jerusalem, to Herod's court, and then were directed south to the little village of Jerusalem. So we rule out short-term astronomical events like solar eclipses, even though they may be very spectacular. The longest a solar eclipse can persist, at least the totality or darkness part, is only 7.5 minutes. Not long enough to qualify for the Star of Bethlehem.
And a falling star is just seconds in the
right, just seconds. Meteors, meteor showers, fireballs simply do not persist long enough, even though they may be very eye-catching and spectacular. And we rule out lunar eclipses for the same reason, occurring when the moon passes into the shadow of the earth. They can last as long as an hour and 40 minutes, but still that's not long enough to qualify for the Star of Bethlehem.
Do you know, when you look at that image on the screen and you stare at it, it almost seems to move towards you?
Yes,
have you ever noticed?
Yes, I think that's an optical illusion. I'm seeing that right now, and I know it's not real.
No, it's a still slide on a screen.
It sure does. Now, one very serious astronomical event for consideration is, of course, a supernova, an exploding star. Sometimes a very massive star in its old age will literally blow its top. This happened, in fact, in February of this year. A star 170,000 light years away in the Large Magellanic Cloud blew up. The Large Magellanic Cloud is, of course, one of two little satellite galaxies in orbit about the Milky Way. So what we actually saw in February of this year took place 170,000 years ago. The light's just now reaching us. A supernova occurring in our own galaxy can be very spectacular, can be seen at night and daytime both. Sometimes they're bright enough to cast a shadow at night. And
did this occur in our galaxy? Well,
no. This occurred in the Large Magellanic Cloud, outside our galaxy, yet it still was visible to the naked eye.
How often do they occur in our galaxy?
We think that, well, of course, that's a matter of controversy, but certainly not more than one every few hundred years or so. The last bright supernova seen in our galaxy was something on the order of 300 years ago. So it is not a common event, and this was the first time that we had ever studied a supernova explosion with modern instruments. Now, one problem with with the theories I've discussed previously is, say there was a supernova or a bright comet or something like this in the sky, why did no one see it but the wise men? You see, the Bible is very plain about this. There's no record of anyone having seen the star except the wise men. And this leads us to a very complex theory concerning planetary conjunctions or groupings in the sky. What you're seeing now is the giant planet Jupiter, as photographed by the robot probe Voyager 1. Scholars tell us the wise men, or magi as we call them, were Zoroastrian priests from ancient Persia. And one of the strong precepts or beliefs of this religion was a belief in astrology. Now, not astronomy, but astrology, the idea that the positions of the sun, moon, and planets in the sky could be used to foretell future events on the earth, or even, affect the course of someone's personality or something like this. We know these people were well aware of the Old Testament prophecies of the birth of a Jewish Savior, predicting this, and we believe they were scanning the skies. The planet Jupiter, to the Zoroastrians, represented the celestial marker or indicator for the king of the gods. Now, Saturn, which is shown in the next slide, also had special significance for the Zoroastrians. We believe it represented the god that watched over the Jewish nation to the Zoroastrians. Now, of course, the Jewish people didn't believe this. Now, we know that in the year 7 BC, there were 3 successive conjunctions or groupings of these two planets in the constellation of Pisces, the fishes. Pisces, the fishes, is the area of the sky which to the Zoroastrians represented the fate of the Jewish people. So one interpretation of this is that the wise men, seeing these 3 successive groupings of Jupiter and Saturn in Pisces, would have considered this 3 talks or parleys of the gods which represented the Jewish people and the king of the gods. And they're talking in the area of the sky concerned with the fate of the Jewish people.
And being astrologers, they would have been aware of this.
Being astrologers, they could have attached great significance to this. Other people, have pointed out that around this time there were other interesting groupings of celestial objects. For example, between 3 and 2 BC, in this time period, there were 3 successive conjunctions of Jupiter with the star Regulus in Leo the lion. Leo was also associated with the Jewish people, some scholars say, representing the line of Judah. So, still though, these interpretations are speculating about the possibility of the Star of Bethlehem as being a grouping of celestial objects or an astrological sign. Or grouping.
What is this rendering here?
This is a representation here of Pisces the fishes, just a rather fanciful painting.
Rather oriental in its rendering.
Yes, it certainly is. Speculations that the Star of Bethlehem could have been an astrological sign, consisting of either what we've talked about or something else. These speculations are attractive because they do offer an explanation for why no one but the wise men saw the star. Because if you were not an astrologer, you would not have put any special significance into groupings of planets other than to say, well, that's neat, or gee whiz, look at that. While we're pretty sure that the wise men could not have ignored any such groupings because it was part of their religious beliefs to try to interpret whatever they saw in the sky. And
did other religions interpret the star?
As far as I am aware, the familiar passages in Matthew, And the King James Version of the Bible is just about the only place where the star is mentioned in the literature at all. Now, I am told by some people that I think there is a possible mention of the star in some of the apocryphal or hidden books of the Bible, which are not considered today to be part of the regular Gospels. But as far as I'm aware, that the familiar Christmas story in Matthew is one of the few places at all whatsoever where there's any mention of the star.
And no other religions
I know of nowhere else, no other sightings or anything in the literature concerning the Star of Bethlehem.
Is this theory that you propose, is this pretty well accepted?
Well, this is a very old theory. I'd say this conjunction theory. And I would say that as far as acceptance, many people consider it a legitimate speculation. Now, a legitimate speculation. Others are not so convinced. You know, there are a lot of people who poo-poo any type of scientific investigation about this and just point out another alternate explanation is it could have been a miracle placed in the sky by the Creator, something you're never going to explain. I would say today the main controversy about the Star of Bethlehem by those who think it can be explained by scientific investigations is, was it an astrological sign, some grouping of planets or grouping of planets with stars, or was it a supernova? See, a supernova would have made a very fine Star of Bethlehem, but the big question about the supernova theory is, if so, why did no one see one around the time that Christ was born?
Everyone would have seen it.
Everyone would have seen it, and we may yet find some old manuscripts telling of a guest star, as the ancients referred to, supernovae.
And how long does a supernova last?
A supernova will typically stay in the sky for maybe at least a few weeks, sometimes a month or more. For example, I point out in the program that in the year AD 1054, the Chinese observed a bright guest star, or supernova, in Taurus the Bull, so bright that you could even see a shadow at night cast by this object, and it was even visible in daylight, and it stayed there for more than a month. So this would have made a very fine Star of Bethlehem.
Well, we certainly hope that those watching will attend the presentations in the planetarium. It's open and free to the public.
It's open and free to the public.
Thank you very much. Dr. Roger Scott, Director of the Ball State University Planetarium, explaining one explanation, at least, of the Star of Bethlehem. Thank you for joining us.